Thank you for tuning in. That was Johnny Blues and the Bucket Kickers with their latest hit song, She Took My Dog and Left the Kids. And this is another apologetic show. On tonight's show, we will be discussing the topic of what we mean when we say, and this we call God. But before we touch on that subject, I'm going to give an update on what I've been up to and what I will be aiming for with a few friends of mine. As of now, the Holy Spackle and I have been working on a blogging network for self-professed Christians inspired by our mutual friend Christian Anarchist. The blog will try to feature people who identify as Christians, from Calvinist presuppositionalists to Catholic Thomists, i.e. me, and moderate evangelicals. For now, you can follow us on our Google Plus community, the link to which will be in the description bar below. Feel free to join us over at Spiritually Honest Ministries. Now back to our scheduled program. How many times has this ever happened to you before? You're speaking about God, and of course an atheist or someone attacking the Christian faith is quick to point out that there are, throughout history, a whole list of deities, and in fact, they'll probably take a list of deities from some Wikipedia page, and it'll include hundreds and several pantheons of deities, and they'll range particularly from Zeus, Thor, Glooskap, and many others. Is the Christian God just like all these other deities? I would think not. In my more advanced video on act and potency, I laid out a distinction between the understanding of God between the two great Greek philosophers, Epicurus and Aristotle. For Epicurus, he held that gods were material beings like ourselves, except with much greater power and wisdom, but their existence, as our own, is dependent on the physical, on matter and motion. However, for Aristotle, the existence of ourselves and the physical was grounded in the prime mover, to which we call God. As a Christian, and as well as our other fellow classical theists, we follow in the footsteps of Aristotle and not of Epicurus. Usually, when one looks at those lists featuring deities of various religions, they are not crowded with classically theistic understandings of God, but with what I will call small g gods, the gods of Epicurus. The capital G God of classical theism is one who maintains the universe in existence. This is the typical portrayal of the deity of classical theism. He is one who depends and relies upon nothing, but who everything relies upon him. But for now, please note that historically speaking, this has always been how we understood God within the Christian tradition, and I'll be sure to quote some various thinkers from the early church fathers all the way to the scholastics to show that this is indeed the case. Saint Aristides, the philosopher who lived in the 2nd century, says, and I quote, "I marveled at the beauty of the world, and I perceived that the world and all that is therein are moved by the power of another, and I understood that he who moves them is God, who is hidden in them and veiled by them. It is manifest that that which causes motion is more powerful than that which is moved, that I should make search concerning this same mover of all, as it to what his nature, for it seems to me he is hidden, he is unsearchable in his nature, and that I should argue to the consistency of his government, so as to grasp it fully. This is a vain effort for me, for it is not possible that a man should fully comprehend it. I say, however, concerning this mover of the world, that he is God of all, who has made things for the sake of mankind, and it seems to me that it is reasonable that one should fear God and shout not oppress man. I say, then, that God is not born, not made, an ever-abiding nature without beginning and without end, immortal, perfect, and incomprehensible. Now, when I say that he is perfect, this means that there is not in him any defect, and he is not in need of anything at all, but things are in need of him. And when I say that he is without beginning, this means that everything which has beginning also has end, and that which has an end may be brought to an end. He has no name, for everything which has a name is kindred to things created. Form he has none, nor any union of members, for whatever passes these is kindred to things. Fashioned he is neither male nor female, the heavens do not limit him, but the heavens and all things visible and invisible receive their bounds from him. Adversary he has none, for there exists not any stronger than he. Wrath and indignation he possesses not, for there is nothing which is able to stand against him. Ignorance and forgetfulness are not in his nature, for he is altogether wisdom and understanding, and in him stands fast all things which exist. End quote. It seems Aristotle is not someone who is convinced that God is some man who lives in the sky or in the heavens, but rather who believes that the heavens and the earth require God so that they themselves may exist. But Aristotle is not alone. St. Augustine of Hippo preaches of the simplicity of God in his Confessions. Not are you compelled to do anything against your will, in that your will is not greater than your power, but greater should it be were you yourself greater than yourself, for the will and power of God is God himself, and that can be unforeseen by you, who knew of all things, nor is there any sort of nature but you know it. And what more should we say why that substance which God is should not be corruptible, seeing that if it were so, it could not be God? St. Augustine is simply following with Aristotle. He is saying that God has no distinction in his will and power. They are not divided, but God himself is his will, and he is his power. He doesn't rely on something called will and power existing outside of himself to form what he is, but rather he is identical to those things. But these guys are not alone in merely just echoing something that just happened in early Christianity, but it later moves on to the scholastic era as well. St. Thomas of Aquinas proves this by way of philosophy, where he defines God is in no way composed of form, matter, essence, and existence, but that he is simple in the most radical sense. This simplicity moves on to other scholastics like St. Bonaventure, who call God pure being itself, meaning to be pure being in and of itself. Within God, he is his power, goodness, knowledge. There is no proper distinction between him. This is a result from God's very simplicity and his aseity. But what are existence, essence, form, and matter to the classical theist, specifically the Thomist? Form and matter concerns what a thing is and what it is made up of. To use an example, a human is a social and rational animal. That is the form. But what of the matter? Matter is the principle of individuation. It differs one human being from another. Essence refers to that which a thing must maintain to be what it is. If a human being ceased to live, in what way could it be considered a social or rational animal? Existence is when all those things manifest together, and there emerges the particular thing. Once composed, these particular things have their being. For the classical theist, particular beings of various compositions of matter, form, essence, and existence gain their being by participating alongside the divine. To use an analogy, the philosopher Plato held that there were in existence particular things, trees, cows, truths. However, in the Platonic heaven, there was the perfect tree, the perfect cow, and the perfect truth. The particular things on earth exist by participating in the reflection of the perfect heavenly thing. For the classical theist, on the other hand, composite beings are only existent because they participate with the most simple of beings, which is being itself. There are three objections to divine simplicity to which I will be responding to. These are the objections from arbitrariness of language, from ineffectuality, and lastly from meaninglessness. The argument from meaninglessness asks how can one speak of a being whose simplicity would mean he is identical with his goodness and power? Would saying God is powerful mean saying God is God? If so, how is that not just some arbitrary tautology? Well, tautologies are not completely meaningless if a person does not understand them as such. For example, when people were aware of the existence of water without knowing it is H2O, and yet when we discover that they are the same, it did not just make the phrase water meaningless. Likewise, when we find out that the foundation of reality is itself the cause of all power, knowledge, and goodness, we can properly call their cause the foundation of these things, which leads to the objection from arbitrariness. Why do we call God all good, all powerful, and all knowing? Is he also not the cause of stupidity, evil, and wickedness? When we could easily call God these things, we choose to go with goodness, power, and knowledge. Furthermore, goodness, as we understand it, is not the same when we observe it as knowledge. So why do we draw no distinction in God? Well, here's the answer. When we understand things such as knowledge, power, and goodness, for the classical theists, they are positive manifestations of being, while evil, weakness, and ignorance are a privation of those things. Power is a capacity to bring about something into existence from some potential. For example, fire has the power to bring about ash from wood. When a fire cannot bring about this change into ash, it lacks power. Knowledge is when we have certain sets of beliefs. Ignorance is when we lack those beliefs. Lastly, goodness is when a being participates with that which exemplifies what it is. A heart in a state of pumping blood is better exemplifying the nature of a heart than one which fails at doing this. Classical theists also hold to the principle of proportionate causality, which claims that which exists in the effect must have a greater existence in the cause. For example, if I were to owe $20, that would mean I would have to have it in some form before I can give it. Otherwise, the money would come from out of nowhere. To say pure being lacks any of these things would mean that something exists in the effect which didn't exist in the cause, or that there is something in existence which came from nothing. The lesser properties we were discussing earlier exist as a privation of the fuller one. They do not need to be predicated to God. Furthermore, we and Scripture use human traits and emotions because as human beings, this is what we most know. And the highest of God's animals are us, because we are in possession of knowledge, something in which other non-rational animals would lack. This is what makes those analogies most appropriate. The last argument is from ineffectuality, which criticizes God's ability to cause anything as a simple being. He cannot exert force, nor can he deliberate on the decisions of his creation. Lastly, he cannot change, and yet all things around him are constantly in change. The first point to address is deliberation. God does not need to deliberate because he does not need any knowledge to garner by thinking. He already contains in him all knowledge. The second point is to address is the nature of causality. For the classical theists, God is the final cause of all creation. He sustains time, space, and matter in existence in his unchanging perfection. This gives reason of end for creation to exist. This unchanging nature giving cause does not mean that it itself changes, but that the state of affairs changes. When Socrates cuts his own hair, he changes, but when he becomes the last man alive, this is not because he himself changes, but because all other men around him have died. I end this episode to inform you that I did not do this with the main intent to convince you, listener, that God is to be completely understood, or that his simplicity is to be completely comprehended. Rather, I just hope that I got out that the Christian characterization of God is the highest, without reliance on anything else. He is no magic man in the sky. He is not like a force of gravity to be manipulated. Rather, he is that which nothing is more perfect, the ground of all existence, and being in and of itself. To play us out here is Johnny Blues and the Bucket Kickers with their latest hit song, Midnight Salon.